Good morning, everybody. Welcome to SafeDefend Live. I'm with the great Doc Vecchi, FBI genius and everything security and safety today. And I got to share a story that he's going to share with you. But today's topic comes from being cooped in a car with two young kids for 3 days driving to and from Las Vegas over last week. So today, Doc Vecchi is going to talk about thinking like a predator. What happened in that car, Doc, to make you come up with this incredible idea?
Well, it comes back to protection. So, I mean, without getting too much into the story, it was one of those things where my wife has two grandkids and she wanted to spend some time with them. And then we had something going on in Las Vegas, and I live in Missouri, so it's a 3-day drive. So my wife and I drive out by ourselves to Las Vegas and then meet her daughter, and there was a birthday party and everything. And then we put the kids in the car and then drove back, and that was another 3 days. And as I'm thinking about it, I was thinking about, the kids are off school, right? They're like 13 and 11, so they're on summer break and everything. And it made me just think about, usually what we talk about, and a lot of things that we talk about, in threat assessment, risk assessment, vulnerability assessment, we always talk from the standpoint of organizations. Like, what can the school do to better be less vulnerable, right? Or have an idea of probabilities, or what do you do in the event of an attack? And we talk the same way in workplace, and we always talk about it in churches and pretty much organizations. And that's kind of what our wheelhouse is about here at SafeDefend. But one of the things, since, they're out of school, what are some things to kind of take these same concepts and what can you do for your own personal safety, your own risk and vulnerability safety, and how can you make it make sense? And it kind of came to me because as I'm driving out with my wife and me, right, I have, if I'm looking at, possible safety things, there are certain considerations. But when you've got two kids or you're walking around a casino, right, in Las Vegas, it's a completely different environment. Even when we're all back in the car driving back, because now you've got, kids, additional needs, additional context, additional, potential issues and things like this. And so I wanted to share, one of the things that I learned from my years in the FBI, and especially in the behavioral science unit. And I always preach this when I train and when I talk about this is, really understanding the offender, right? And we look at the offender in terms of what might they do to attack a school or a workplace. And I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about what everyday people can do to reduce their risk and vulnerability, and to attacks, to safety, to things like this. But I'm going to talk about attacks, obviously, because that's the worst. And one of the things is, first of all, you got to think like a predator. You've got to really be able to put yourself into the position of what might a bad guy, what might a predator do? Who might they target in your environment, right? And look at it from the standpoint of an analytical approach, just like we do when I sit down with a school administrator, a superintendent or a CEO, and talk about how do we look at risk and vulnerability for your employees at work. Well, this is kind of the same thing, but a little bit different, that I think it might be a good, takeaway for individual people and families since we're on spring break. That was my thoughts.
Well, that's a good thought. It's interesting. If you're a professional sports player or a college sports player, or even a high school sports player, your coach is looking at film of another team to see what they do and how they play the game, so they know how to defeat their opponent. I think it's interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about how a predator thinks, because that's personal safety stuff. And if you're not thinking about that and you're not prepared for it and you get surprised by it, it's too late then, really. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. So let's talk about, how do you think like a predator? What things can people do to put themselves in the right mindset and position themselves? As a deployed military guy, we had certain things we didn't do when we were outside the wire. There's certain, if we were at a restaurant, there were certain places we didn't sit. There were certain areas we didn't go to because we knew that threat was higher there. I think that whole philosophy applies to the discussion today, because same scenario, the enemy was among us in those cities, and we had to be careful and watch our back so we could come home in one piece.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, the military does it, all the time. In fact, they do it the best, especially in special operations when they have to go in, because it's usually a small group of people in an area that they don't know, and they've got to really do their background and really understand the
Yep.
potential threats and risk of the environments, as well as, what is their vulnerabilities? Where can they be hurt, right? And I think that it kind of goes back to just basic investigations or basic ideas of you have to answer the 6 W's, right? The who, what, when, where, how, and why, and W on the end of how in case you're counting, right? And and so your basic questions you need to ask yourself, okay, is who may attack? Okay, why would they attack? Where would they attack? When would they attack? What would they use to attack? Is it going to be a gun, a knife, poison, run somebody over, some other ambush approach? And then how would they actually carry it out? How would they actually carry it out? And those are the questions you gotta ask yourself. But it's not really from your perspective. You got to really put yourself in the perspective or in the place of, if you were the bad guy, if you were going to attack, why would you do it? That's one of the first things, right? Because why will determine kind of who it might be. And so when we're talking about predators, there are different types, and their types are divided based on their motivation as to why they do it, right? So for example, in most school situations, most school attacks or workplace attacks, you talk about the active shooter situation, right? Everybody
Right.
talks about that. Those are typically grievance, and we've talked about this on this show, ad nauseum, right? Ad nauseum, talking about grievance and what different types of grievance. Well, they feel wronged, or they feel persecuted or bullied, or they had a significant loss in their life. They're in crisis. They are having issues like that, right? But there are other types of attacks that we don't talk a lot about because it's not really the main focus of what we do at SafeDefend. But those are other attacks from other motivated offenders, such as a resource predator. A resource predator, someone who's, if you're staying in a hotel, like I was in Las Vegas, right? Someone that would, are looking at me, my family, the grandkids, whatever, for something of value that they want to take. It could be money, it could be some sort of valuables or jewelry, it could be the rental car, it could actually be the kids, right? As a resource, right? Because we see all the human trafficking stuff going
Yep.
on. So that might be a motivation, right? The other type of motivation is just the process predator, the one who just is going to attack someone just because they enjoy it, they get off on it. Big example of that is what we see in New York City a lot, where they have the sucker punch attacks, right? They just basically go up to somebody and just hit them from behind in the head, and then they post it on social media and they get a kick out of it. Those are your process predators. And then of course you got your terrorist, you got your ideology, right? And these might be your protests that we're running into a lot at the not just the campuses and stuff, but in downtowns. I mean,
Yep.
these protests pop up. They oftentimes get violent. It's based on some sort of ideology, typically political, especially since we are in a election year. That's a big thing now. Everyone's polarized, but it also could be religious. It could be a number of different things. Just we talk about ideology. And so if you look at those 4 types of predators, and then you look at yourself and you say, okay, what about me might make me a target? And so if I am traveling or I'm at home, I want to try to break things down by pretty much by sectors. And what I mean by a sector is that you have certain things that um, that you deal with in life every day. So for example, you have a home sector, okay, and everything that goes along with your home, right? You have a work or school sector, you might have a church sector, a favorite bar or restaurant, or maybe if you're into sports, you go to a stadium or arena, whatever it might be. And for every one of these sectors, we want to ask those questions. Who might attack? Why would they attack? Because it might be different for someone attacking your home than if you're just walking on the street. You might be 2 different type of predators you run into. Why would they attack? When would they attack? What would they use? And then how would they carry it out? And so for each of the sectors, it's very simple. You break it down to a few things. Number one, what are the important people and things that you need to protect or you need to be aware of for each of those sectors, right? So for me, uh, in that trip to Las Vegas, okay, I had kind of a vehicle or travel sector on the way down there, and I had a hotel sector because I stayed in several hotels. And so each one of those was a little bit different going down because it was myself and my wife. So the important things, people wise, was myself and my wife, right? If I had a dog with me, the dog would be added to those important things, okay, and prioritized appropriately. You add the kids to the car, that adds another important thing to think about. And then the other thing you look at is important areas. Where, what are the specific areas where someone, might attack you? That's part of tied into the sector. And then the critical times, because if I'm sleeping in a hotel room, that might be, a critical time to think about or important time to think about, against someone who might burglarize my hotel room or, break into the car or whatever. And then that leads essentially to two other things, right? Looking really hard at your vulnerabilities, and then what are the routes of access that they might take. Okay, and then if you put yourself in the position of the predator, you say, okay, so here's the important people and things. Okay, here's the important areas, here's the important times, here are the vulnerabilities, here's how I might approach or the route of access I might take. Now what am I going to do? What are my tactics, my techniques, my procedures, and most importantly, the motivation? And so this works extremely well. The military does it. They don't explain it, I don't think, from the standpoint of behavioral science and offenders. They're looking at it from the standpoint of enemies.
Yep.
But they take a very, very similar approach to this. And this is kind of a way that I use personally for myself, for my family, and when I help others, in their personal lives as far as safety. These are some considerations. If you can think like a predator, then you have a better chance of reducing your risk and vulnerability to any sort of attack. And that's kind of it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. When you think like a predator, I also need to think about how you appear when you're in a vacation environment, right? Are you the person that's everybody notices and sees, and you making a big spectacle of yourself? Because if you are, you become a quick target. Right?
Absolutely.
And what we saw overseas was we would dress in button-down shirts and khaki pants, or button-down shirts and pants, to just blend in to the country. So we stick out as a sore thumb anyway when you're 6'3", 250 walking around in certain countries, but you don't draw attention to yourself by having patriotic shirts on or dressing a certain way that draws attention to who you are. You try to fit in. I would say, as you're on vacation, don't be that guy. Right? Have fun, but don't be the spectacle. Don't let your kids, your daughter, for instance, wear things that are going to draw attention to her when she's walking around outside in whatever, right? Part of thinking like a predator is don't be noticed by the predator, right? Camouflage yourself in the environment that you're in. I mean, animals do it all the time. They're born in an environment and they have natural camouflage. What are you doing to naturally camouflage yourself when you're in a certain place? Are you the red dot on a white screen, or are you the guy and gal family that just blends in, has fun, and just goes about your business and nobody really notices, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest protection for a family when they're traveling is don't go out of your way to be noticed by people.
Yeah, and it's a calculus. We've seen studies where you talk to offenders in prison, right? We did this in the behavioral science unit at the FBI. And we kind of came down with, there's a calculus that a predator makes on whether or not they're going to target you or move on. The first thing is perceived value, right? What's the perceived value that you have? Like you're saying, if you're wearing bling and acting crazy, and you got the big watch on, and your jewelry and things like this, your perceived value is probably, for a resource predator, is probably going to go up. If you are not paying attention to your kids in the casino, then that process or that process predator might look at the value of the kids. But if you're protecting the kids, if they're close to you and you're looking around, they're going to move on to another target, right? They're also going to look at the risk themselves, right? am I going to get in trouble? Because it's self-preservation for them. And again, if the perceived value is not there, they move on. If the perceived value in there, but it's too risky, they're going to move on, right? And then they're going to look at, are you paying attention, right? Or are you on your phone? Okay. If you're looking around and situationally aware, they're going to move on. And lastly, if you look like that you can be a problem, like a hard target for them, that you're not going to be a victim, they're going to move on. And so, predators they're cowards, essentially,
Yep.
right? And they're just gonna do it when you are vulnerable and they're looking for those vulnerabilities. It's just like a lion that's going after a bunch of antelopes. They don't go after the strong ones. They wait for the weak ones to kind of fall away, and those are the ones they go after. So kind of the same thing with humans.
Makes sense. Well, Doc, it's a great discussion on predators. I hope that you have a great week and you enjoy your time and things are going well. With that, Dave and Doc, we are out of here.
Have a great weekend.